All right, there's the handshake, and now let's make this live.
All right. Can you hear me now? Okay. I got a couple of waves and thumbs up. Hi there, and welcome to our workshop, Maritime Folknet, a small, very nonprofit organization located out of the Seattle, Washington area, is sponsoring this. We are using funds provided to us by King County for Culture, raised through hotel and motel taxes. So please do come and stay in Seattle in a motel sometime and then go home. Anyway, so we're really pleased to have Gibb Schreffler as a guest. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was looking at a bulletin from the Pomona College Music Department. Got to put my hat on one more time here. There you go, my alumni cap. Now you've seen it. And it said that they had just brought on a professor one of whose specialties was sea shanties, and I got really excited. And I found his email address, and we corresponded a few times. And then in 2016, I went to my 45th reunion, and Gibb and I had lunch after the reunion and chatted up a whole bunch. And then he came up to Seattle with a bunch of professors doing workshops for alumni and parents and whoever there, and helped him out with that. So anyway, I'm just really thrilled. And then a year or so back, Pomona was smart enough to grant Gibb tenure. So he's now not just an assistant professor, but an associate professor. So he's that much more august. Um, though he's just really pretty mild-mannered and pretty nice guy anyway about it. Um, so he's done a lot of presentations. He's presented at Mystic Seaport Festival. He did a presentation, I think after the TikTok craze, for the University of Connecticut, um, and has written a book called Boxing the Compass, which you should all buy. It's a thick read. It's one of those things that you don't. I don't suggest that. Oh my God, good to see those around. Mine's over there. I'll have to haul it out. But it really does get deep into origins and the study of shanties and how they developed, um, and it's worth having in your library. Um, so Gibb has done a lot of work with Pomona students. He was just telling me that he did a recording at our wonderful music hall, one of my favorite buildings in the world, just last Friday night. That will, I guess, be out in public sometime in the foreseeable future. Um, and But he teaches various classes in the music department. I was lucky at just last April and May to attend his final class on world music, where he was covering reggae like a really large blanket. He had a stack of 45s about that tall, and was doing all kinds of amazing things. So, um, what I've always said about Gibb is it's just really fun working on keeping up with his brain. So, have fun keeping up with Gibb's brain. And Gibb, welcome to our little workshop.
Yo, thank you. Thank you, Dan, for that nice introduction. Hey, everybody. Thank you to Maritime Folknet for having me and inviting me. And thanks to David as well for helping set this up. And all you in the audience for your kind participation. We've got some people on Zoom and some people watching on YouTube. And we're going to have, at the end of this session, some participation as well from Zoom folks. So the title of my workshop here or talk has the phrase in there, history and genre. I don't purport to give you the history of shanties. That's not possible. But I did want to get into this by saying I don't think the history of shanties has been in any way exhausted in publications. There there was a flurry of publications about shanties in the first half of the 20th century, and that kind of caps off with Stan Hugel's Shanties of the Seven Seas, published in 1961. And after that, it's almost as if Stan Hugel had the final word, and there hasn't been a lot. There have been things, and I could go on and acknowledge various people who have worked on some things since then. But in terms of just that basic idea of the history of shanties, or different aspects of the history of shanties, little new ground has been, relatively speaking, little new ground has been covered since the middle of the 20th century. And I just want to encourage people to think that there is there's just a ton more in terms of work to do on the history of shanties. Many, many books, new books could be written with new information now, with the resources that we have that folks didn't have in the early 20th century. So the remarks that I'd like to make are approaching what I've been doing in terms of that that new work, because science can't stop, research can't stop in 1961. It's amazing to think that we would just stop with the word of something published in 1961. But how I'm getting into that, what really helps in terms of the way I look at the history, is to put an emphasis on shanties as a genre. Go back to just thinking it's music, it's song, it's a genre of song. And for me, what's helped most is to not settle for the idea of defining the genre in these super broad terms, like like a song sung near water somewhere. That's too broad for me. And even to say work song is too broad for me, because throughout history and all over the world, there's been songs sung near water and for work, and that doesn't really narrow us down enough to get a really accurate sense of the specificity of the history of shanties as I'll present it as a genre. Please give me one moment to share some slide presentation. Right, so I happen to spell shanty with the CH, because I believe the root of that is either the French or English chant or chant, and I like to preserve the etymology a bit in my spelling. There were some people in the early 20th century that insisted we should spell it with an SH because it should be spelled as it's pronounced. Now, I don't know when English has ever been spelled how it was pronounced, and I don't know, I'm not going to start spelling chorus with a K or chandelier with an SH, so that's what I do. But just to review some of the points I was making there, I consider shanty to be...
the way I spell it. I like it.
Excuse me? Yeah. Could you guys mute?
Let's spell it the way I spell it, because...
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end, please. Shanty is a genre of song, and today most associated with, and these are the key points, the merchant vessels. This is familiar to a lot of folks. It's not a military genre. And I underlined that I was at certain group work tasks. I don't consider all the work tasks done on board a ship to be accompanied by shanties. There are certain tasks. I say group work tasks because I also want to emphasize that I think solo work tasks may and often did include the sailors vocalizing in some way, but those vocalizations I don't think it's helpful to include as part of the idea of shanties. And the time period, roughly late 1830s to 1920s, is in the shipboard context specifically. But this association, which I'm fine that it exists as an association, but it's biased. It's weighted towards factors such as where people who wrote about the genre encountered it, and who those writers were, and what their motivations were for writing about it. Now, let's say, for example, just hypothetically, if people on the moon sang shanties, the only people who would encounter those are astronauts. So we would be getting, if someone were to write about shanties on the moon, we'd be getting only this perspective of Neil Armstrong and such. So the shanty genre is sung was sung in many other places besides the decks of ships. But certain people that would write about it, that was where they'd most likely encounter it. So that leads to the heavy weighting in the writing on emphasizing things that were happening on shipboard. So taking it as a genre is to look at, return to the musical characteristics, the textual features of it, the methodological, like how one goes about performing, creating, organizing the performance of shanties, and the cultural characteristics, where did it sit in terms of culture. And so if we filter out the popular association, which we get from the discourse on shanties, from those writings by certain individuals who had a certain profile to them, if we filter those out, we find that shanties were not limited to the sea and not even limited to work. I want to say as well that I'm having a tough time because my text is blocked, that if we want to understand how shanties were formed and performed musically, I like to see it as a species or a type of song embedded in action. So the action is not only work action, but it is embedded in action, developed initially by African Americans from West African paradigms, first spread among African American communities, and finally was acculturated to by all laborers on ships. Other folks from other cultural backgrounds eventually learned this cultural, this method as the standard operating method of shipboard life. And if we look at it that way, we can see that the genre, as is often narrated, or contrary to what is often narrated, did not die with the sailing ships, but in some sense, pieces of that have continued, and they've run through American music for a very long time. So thinking about shanties as embedded in action, what were the actions on the ship in the shipboard context? Just break them down to two, and this is going to be familiar ground, I know, for a lot of the audience out there. So I would break it down into types of intermittent actions at first. That is action you only do at certain points in time. These are the hauling tasks, and the most the most model example of those hauling tasks is for raising yard halyards. Used to just call them halyard shanties or say for halyards, but I'm going to be more specific now because there are a lot of lines in a ship that are called halyards, but not all of them are for raising heavy things like yards. So I want to just give a sense of how the song embeds in that type of action and see the correspondences and how that same action might be done elsewhere other than ships. This photograph comes from Lydia Parrish's work, early 20th century in the Georgia Sea Islands. These are stevedores working on shore. They're loading cargo at the other end of that line. They've got a block and tackle lifting up some cargo, lifting up some timber, presumably. They're singing shanties when they do it. That's what Lydia Parrish documented their shanties in the Georgia Sea Islands. And this action that they're doing is the very same action as that action of raising the halyards. So it's the song is embedded in that type of action rather than, say, specifically in a shipboard action. Now, so going to what are the specifics of form? Now, I easily feel comfortable in saying that over 99% of songs sung for the intermittent action, like hauling on yard halyards, has the form that you see here. I call it an even call and response, or maybe a balanced call and response. The responses are the same exact length as the call. I've indicated the responses by indentation in the yellow text. Okay, the call from the leader or the soloist or the shanty man is in the non-indented white text. Yeah, let's hear. I'm going to play now a recording of this particular example coming from Georgia in the 1920s.
The prettiest girl in Doughboy Town, slow boy, slow. Her name is Fancy Nellie Brown. Oh, my bullet boy, slow. Heave a high and let her go. Slow boy, slow. Heave and let it blow. Oh, blow, my bullet boys, blow. The prettiest girl I ever knew. Blow, blow. She wear the red Morocco shoe. Oh, blow, my bullet boys, blow. The prettiest girl I ever saw. Blow, boys, blow. She's always riding the white horse. Oh, blow, my bullet boys, blow. The prettiest boy in Dubai town. Blow, boys, blow. His name is Little Johnny Brown. Oh, blow, my bullet boys, blow.
So what I'm urging us to do is to, and I know this is familiar, this type of song is familiar to much of the audience listening, but what I'm urging us to do is to return to the musical details here and discard, at least for now, just the simple idea that, oh, it's a shanty because some sailor sang it and he or she was working and it was on the sea. But think, what is the musical qualities? What are the musical characteristics of this genre here? Look at the form. Okay, the even call and response, the fact that the response is the same thing over and over again. It had to be. It's group labor. The group can't guess what they have to sing, so they have to know. That has to be scripted. That has to be a known, planned thing ahead of time. So the choruses are going to be the same, and simply what the caller is doing is creating couplets, creating 2-line verses, couplets, to fill in those slots on this particular thing. And to go with that, we should talk about how that's specifically embedded in action. And this makes even the work aspect, or the different work aspects in different contexts of shanties, a unique genre as well. Because when you work on the halyard to shanties, again, acknowledging that many of my audience knows this, there is a very, very specific way of working. You're only hauling, this is the intermittent action, the intermittent quality of it, you're only hauling during the choruses. And most of the time you're hauling at precisely 2 times per each of your choruses at very, very predictable spots, such that someone could sing a new shanty for the halyard that you'd never heard before. And because those halyard shanties are over 99% similar to each other, you could hear that new one and you would know in an instant exactly where you're supposed to haul those 2 times per each chorus on the shanty. And that's a very specific method of working and hauling. It doesn't just spontaneously originate everywhere in the world in every work song tradition. It was a specific aspect of this particular work song tradition. And here's a visual of what that looks like. And was you ever in old Hong Kong?
Roll the cotton down.
All eating dim sum and drinking oolong.
Roll the cotton down.
But the port in China I love best.
Roll the cotton down.
Is the port of Macau that is the best.
Roll the cotton down.
And gambling all day and gambling all night.
Roll the cotton down.
And fussing and fighting and rolling all night.
Roll the cotton down.
Oh, was you ever in Tennessee?
Roll the cotton down.
All right, those are some of my Claremont colleges, Pomona College students with me. And I like to share clips like this because it's quite rare nowadays to have visuals of folks actually underway at sea and performing shanties and performing them with the historical method, which is what this is. You may have thought, have I heard the shanty before? And you might say, yes, I've heard it before. I've heard this chorus before. To my mind, that is the shanty. The chorus is the fixed part. But whatever I sang just then was in couplets, but they were couplets that I was making up, that I was improvising. I was fulfilling the duty of the soloist to create those couplets on the spot. I want to show one more example of this. I'm with a group of middle school students from the Los Angeles area, again underway at sea. Tommy's gone and I'll go to pull down below. Oh, Tommy's gone with a hullabaloo. Pull down below. Oh, Tommy's gone to Baltimore. It's 100 years on the eastern shore. Oh, have you been to Ocean Charter School? That's a place where you learn the golden rule. And gone to Miss Megan's class. Oh, I hope this year I'd pass her class. And hoist her up for a bulldog pie. Well, hoist that up atop so higher and high. Oh, ginger pudding and pumpkin pie. The gray cat kicked out the black cat's eye. And was you ever in New Orleans? That's the place where I eat that rice and beans. Oh, beans is all I eat every day. Now we're sailing away back to LA. And when I get there, my bed I'll stay. I'm gonna sleep the rest of the day. Oh, one more pull and that might do. Oh, pull it up, that might be through. Oh, I thought I heard our maid say, just a few more. Right, so that's the whole process of getting up an upper topsail halyard. And it's a smaller vessel, but we got a small size crew there. So there's some degree of realism there. I noted at the bottom of my slide here on the bottom right hand corner, I counted, what's the typical length, the average length, how many verses do you need to come up with? It was 10.5 verses it took to get that up. And if you counted up those intermittent pulls, there were 42 pulls in the whole thing. But I hope you make some observations of the method of performance that's happening here. Again, I'm improvising these verses. Some of them are verses I've sung before, and I kind of had them in my back pocket, and I pulled them out. Some were ones that completely spontaneous, that I'm making a commentary on these school children and their teacher and where we're going and that sort of thing. These are, as we go, we can pick up these various characteristics of genre. So back to my great division of the types of action in which the shanties were embedded. One was the intermittent type of actions, usually associated with hauling tasks. The other would be the continuous action, usually associated with heaving tasks. So we're familiar with heaving a pump at sea, heaving a capstan are some examples. Heaving the brake windlass is very, very important because in the middle of the 19th century, which is the heyday of shanties, the brake windlass was the kind of device par excellence on the merchant ships. So a lot of the shanties were sung on that. And here's a sound example of a brake windlass shanty. So we can add a couple more things to our observation of the genre characteristics. It's very slow. It's quite slow, and that's connects with the fact that it's a windlass shanty. You can see in the picture in the upper left, which comes from it's a photograph of the Charles W. Morgan whaling ship now at Mystic Seaport. There's on one side of the bars that you use the brake handles to heave the windlass, you've got 7 crew members there. And I've seen another photo, a similar photo, they've got 9 on each side of these bars. I mean, this is a very heavy task, and it's going very slowly. So it necessitates that slow tempo. You can also see that in this particular song, an additional extended chorus is added. A grand chorus is added. That halyard pulling that you just saw previously, we got it done in just a few minutes, and 10 and a half verses, 42 pulls. But to get up, say, an anchor with this windlass could take several hours. So one of the functions of adding this additional longer chorus, the grand chorus, is to pad what you're doing, to pad it, to extend it, to make it longer. So the form, getting back to musical characteristics, the form of heaving type shanties was very often, in fact, in my sort of survey of it, for the windlass, in fact, usually most of the shanties were the exact same form as those hauling type shanties. But some of them add the grand chorus. For example, in this one, for Clear the Track, Let the Bullgine Run, you see the first part at the top is in the exact same form of call and response as any hauling song. It's the exact same length. It fits the same amount of time. There are the same poetic metrical length. And then you've got this grand chorus that you optionally can add that is the identical length to the part that came before that, but extends the length and allows the chorus singers to sing more, and the shanty man, the leader, the caller, doesn't have to come up with so many verses for so many hours in that sort of way. And here's, for folks who haven't kind of seen this, can get an idea of the action through an example of some folks at Mystic Seaport heaving a windlass to a shanty.
Oh, the smartest packet that you buy. Oh, is the old wildcat on the small line. Clear away the track and let the bullgine run. Hey, rig and check and load that car. Oh, our heroes, oh, our eyes, and we are on my way. Clear away the track and let the bullgine run. Oh, our eyes, I do a score. Oh, it's gonna
Great. So we've been looking at the formal characteristics of the genre of shanties, and my take on it, the vast majority of what we would want to call shanties, if we hope to really recover an accurate history, would pay attention to this form, and the vast majority of shanties contain one of these two forms. Speaking to what are the lyrics about, what's the lyrical style, what kind of material, first of all, is used in the lyrics? Well, I mean, themes that don't relate to the maritime are extremely common. They're often borrowed from popular songs of the time, the lyrics. So that last song is talking about, hey, rig-a-jig in the low-back car, from some popular Irish-inspired stage music, and then saying, Eliza Lee on my knee, clear the track, let the bullgine run. This bullgine was a trope in minstrel songs. Lyrics are often topical about current events, what's going on at the time. Santa Ana gained the day he fled the plains of Monterey. And incidental commentary on what's going on, like I was doing on the ship, singing about the middle school students in their class and their teacher and that sort of thing. How does the caller compose? How does he or she put these things together? Well, we observe as well that the lyrics are very usually non-narrative. It's an open-ended form. I like to say there's no beginning or end to a shanty. You just start and you stop. So you're not really trying to tell a story. You've just got these couplet forms. This core of the form are these couplets that are a very specific length, like a Lego block, of a specific size Lego block, that can be interchangeably used to build things. And improvisation is involved in this. And I like to just to break down a little bit the types of improvisation. One of them I would call just pure ad-libbing, like you're just totally making up new things in the moment you haven't sung before. Another thing you might be doing is pulling on stock verses. It's your toolkit. It's like I said, I have certain verses in my back pocket that I might just pull out when I'm sitting there. There's one account I read of shanty singing where they said the observer said the singer was you could see him rolling his eyes and looking up around, while the chorus was singing. He's searching his brain for what the next verse is going to be. And if you're sort of stuck, that's when you pull in one of these stock verses, like we'll see later. Was you ever in Mobile Bay, screwing cotton by the day? That one works in every shanty at any time. So if I haven't thought of a new verse yet, I might say that. Or was you ever in New York town, strolling Broadway up and down? These are stock verses. And then floating verses are similar, but it's kind of like the idea of take a verse from a different shanty and use it in your shanty. And that's works again because these verses are standardized Lego blocks that can be worked to build any Lego piece you want to build. All right, so I want to run with this idea of the lyrical style for the rest of what I want to present, and do delve into some of the history as I see it. What you see here is a map where I'm, literally mapping observations or sightings of songs in African American communities before the time when we really see the shanty genre emerge on shipboard. 1840s is when we start to see an explosion of accounts in the historical record of shanties being sung on ships. We start to see it in the late 1830s, but it really starts to explode in the 1840s. All of these references are from before then, and they're all in African American communities. And the contexts aren't limited to the ones I have here, but these are two big ones. Singing of these types of songs for corn shucking, which I'll talk more about later, or corn songs, and singing these types of songs for rowing boats. You can see in the kind of the upper left here the range of the corn songs throughout the southeast of the United States. And then this heavy black line that snakes down follows all my sightings and historical accounts of rowing songs. So starting from the upper south, going down the coast, then sightings in the Caribbean, and then down to the Caribbean coast of South America, and the different places and the different dates, to kind of start to get that picture of how this genre is spreading. And just want to make the connection that the corn songs are inland. They're on the farms that are inland. And then you've got rivers that carry this culture downriver, downstream to the ports, and the rowing songs are being performed in those rivers, and eventually those rivers reach the seaports. So I want to elaborate now to begin with on those two particular historical contexts that predate the deepwater sailing ship context. The first is corn shucking. This was something that was done in the fall. The harvest was in the fall of each year. Plantations that were growing corn, once the crop did come in and it needed to be picked and then shucked, when that happened, the labor was too much for the enslaved labor force on one particular plantation. So the planter would borrow, quote unquote, the enslaved labor from another plantation to come to his plantation and help out with the corn shucking. Now, as far as could be possible in those and the wretched situation of being enslaved, those particular events were considered to be fun events. They were a chance for the enslaved people to see other people, to socialize, to drink well, to eat well, to sing, and as I said, to socialize together. And they made the corn shucking into a competition. They broke into teams, see who could shuck the corn the fastest. And they were call and response songs, and you had someone, I think depicted in this illustration by this man I'm circling around, standing on top of the pile of corn. He was called the captain. not the shanty man, but he was called the captain, and he was the song leader, stood atop the pile of corn, sang out his solo verses, and the rest of the crew who was shucking the corn gave the responsorial to that. The folklorist, late folklorist Roger Abrams speaks about these songs in one of his books. Makes some points. He's connecting this this paradigm to West African paradigms of call and response work singing. He says that the performances of the song leader in corn songs, quote, seem to arise from bards of sub-Saharan Africa. And he says that unlike a Western poet, the bard is not known for a finished product which encapsulates an experience or describes an event. Rather, she or he is called upon to maintain a sense of openness of composition. That's that non-narrative form. The great singer had a fund of fragmentary reference on which to draw and asserted his or her rhetorical skills through stitching these fragments together. Roger Abrams has another book called The Man of Words in the West Indies, talking about essentially like the roots of Calypso in Trinidad, but thinking about this paradigm of like the respect and honor a really witty person, a really witty caller would have. This person who has these fund of verses and has these strong rhetorical skills. He also mentions that the songs were directed at the planter, who in slavery context was called the master, and we can draw the parallel to the ship's captains and officers being like the masters in that situation. The songs were directed to the masters and others present. And observing of the form, he says that the antiphonal, that is to say, call and response, structure of the corn shucking song not only embodies the very way in which the work is organized. By centering and coordinating the group's combined energies, the singing empowers the captain, that's the shanty man, to speak for the group and to make whatever commentary he might wish to make on the proceedings, on slave life in general, and on the nonsensical goings-on he has noticed in the big house life. Okay, I hope you can see some parallels between the sailor's predicament and their kind of trapped situation and the earlier enslaved people's predicaments. Here's an example of a couple corn songs. I would ask you to note the formal characteristics again, and then the lyrical characteristics. The form is that balanced call and response. Any of these could be worked as for the yard halyards on a ship, right? The same couplet is there in the white colored font, and the yellow colored font are the responses to that. And look at song number 1. Just read over the chorus for yourself. Duranzi hi ho. And the second one has this chorus of, hey, come a rolling down, good morning, ladies all. We could compare those to better known sailor shanties from a shipboard context. Renzo Boys Renzo is one of them. And those early 20th century writers were always trying to figure out what the heck is Renzo. Oh, maybe it's a Portuguese name. He was a whaler. Weren't there a lot of Portuguese from the Azores on the whaling ships, all this sort of stuff? Well, I can't claim to tell you what Renzo is, but if I'm singing this corn shucking song with this Duranzi in the chorus there, that leads me to think I need to dig deeper, and that the origins of that word come from somewhere else, then rather than to imagine it must have something to do with maritime life. It might have something to do with something else. And then there's this other shanty here with the good morning ladies all also in the chorus there. Rowing was the other, and this is the earliest context historically where we see songs of this format. One early account I've quoted from here says, observing that they rowed with languor and that we made but little progress, the coxswain was desired to exchange the helm for an oar and to enliven his comrades with a song. So the coxswain here is the caller, or the shanty man in a sense, encouraging them to join in chorus and to pull together in musical time. He placed himself amidst the crew in the center of the boat, and pulling his oar stronger than the others, he invented extempore, improvised, lines for a favorite African tune. Okay, this comes from 1806. This is quite an early reference, and I think it's fascinating to try to imagine what might have been meant at that time by an African tune, and to see how, in a few decades after that, how what might have been heard then as an African tune then starts to be heard as an American tune. So these, before I look at these lyrics, I just wanted to say that these enslaved people were charged with transporting people in the riverways that were, at one time much more efficient than roadways in early America. So they were going back and forth between the plantations, rowing these boats. The songs were usually described as particularly mournful or plaintive, and often have these themes that you'll see in the first one here on the upper left. Jenny gone away. Okay, this is a sad song. This is, speaks to the experience of enslaved people and the reality that, you were treated as a piece of property. You could be sent away. You could be bought, quote unquote, by someone else and brought to a different area of the country. Your family members could be bought and relocated and separated from you. And I think that's where this Jenny comes away theme comes from. And we can start to hear how when that's in a sailor song, it sounds like, well, I'm leaving my family to go across the sea sort of thing, or I'm leaving my beloved sort of thing. Similar feeling, just slightly transformed in that context. So that's a rowing song. The second one's not a rowing song. I snuck it in here. It's a steamboat song. This is speaking to the steamboats in the great rivers, the Missouri, the Mississippi, the Ohio, the crews on those steamboats to stoke the boilers beneath and to load and unload cargo were usually Black Americans, and noted for their songs as well. And this song has this chorus here: John come down the holler, or the hollow, as might be said sometimes. The holler or hilo, or holler was the word that was used for those depressions, those geographic depressions in the South. And we might be familiar with the sailor shanty that has hilo in it. Hollow, if you said it in a Southern accent, hilo would be like hollow, would be the pronunciation of that. And maybe listen to this recording and hear how slow it is and maybe mournful, and you could maybe start to imagine how this song would emerge from these other songs. I want to mention one more work context, that is cotton screwing. If you haven't heard of it before, I would not be surprised. It's criminally underknown. That's probably not a correct word to say, but it's I've been to archives at places like Mobile, Alabama, which were famous for this activity in their ports, and people in the archives don't know about it. I've looked in Galveston and New Orleans and Mobile for the tool that you see here with this jack screw used for this work called cotton screwing, and nobody has one, and they're not in museums anywhere. This was the absolutely essential work, the last link in the chain for America's foundation of its economy at the time. Cotton export. That's what this whole business was about. I mean, that was the justification of many for slavery. It was like, this is our economy, cotton, we got to get it out. We need this cheap labor force to do it. But to get it out and onto the ships, you had to really pack the cottons into the ships because it was such a light cargo. You didn't turn a profit unless you rammed it in, as these men are doing with these enormous jacks. You stuffed in as much as possible. And for the first 3.5 decades or so of this labor going on, the entire workforce was Black men. And they were noted every time for singing all day long their songs from dusk till dawn as they did this extremely difficult labor. It was called the hardest labor you could do. Interestingly, it was also the highest paid manual labor at that time that you could do. I want you to note the composition of these crews here. There's 2 crews. There are 4 men on each of these jack screws. And then you've got, with each one, these men that are standing over. They're higher. They're not laboring. Those are the 4 men. But the 4 men were also the shanty men. They sang the songs. They were the song leaders that were there. This is an absolutely unique part of this genre, that you would have a work song tradition that values the non-laboring member of the group in terms of like using his muscles, but laboring in terms of his voice. They would value that person so much that that person is part of the crew, not only getting paid, but getting paid $1 more than everybody else to be the foreman and to sing the songs. It was considered so essential to the work. But by around the late 1830s, non-black laborers also moved into this profession, attracted by the high wages primarily. And then you start to have black and white crews doing this sort of work. And one of my theories is that this was like the most important site where people outside of the African American community acculturated to this particular method of work singing, because you didn't have other contexts where white and black laborers would be working in the same space, except for what? Except for eventually on ships. But we know that these laborers, they would have come into this profession after 3 to 4 decades when it was entirely black men doing it, singing songs all day long. And now you're entering in this profession, and my conjecture is that you would be compelled to acculturate to the method. You would also have to learn to sing in this method in order to get this job done. And then those types of men were seasonal laborers that often worked at this job in the fall and winter time, and then in the warmer weather they went to work on ships, bringing this method to the ships after that. All right. One of the early famous accounts we have of cotton screwing comes from the journalist Charles Nordhoff. In 1848, he observes as follows: "Singing or chanting, we don't know the pronunciation, as it is called, is an invariable accompaniment to the working in cotton, and many of the screw gangs have an endless collection of songs, rough and uncouth, both in words and melody, but answering well the purposes of making all pull together, and enlivening the heavy toil. The foreman is the shanty man." This is the very first appearance in the historical record and publication of the word shanty man. The foreman is the shanty man who sings the song, the gang only joining in the chorus, which comes at the end of every line, and at the end of which again comes the pull at the screw handles. The chants, or chants, as may be supposed, have more rhyme than reason to them. I'll share with you just one version, or just one song that I believe to have been a cotton screwing song. I'm going to play it and then make an observation about it. So you can follow the lyrics and listen first, and then we'll make that observation.
Captain, Captain, what the devil is you? Oh, Captain, Captain, what the devil is you? Fire, fire, fire down below. 100,000 there I got now. Oh, just on them 1,000 from below. Just fire, 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 Lord, fire down below. Look at them here on the rise and the fall and stone. Just a mighty and rise and fall. Fire. Fire down below.
They're singing about stowing the cotton bales, 1,000 bales, creating tiers, creating levels of the cotton bales. And just to be consistent what I've done before, I'll put a sailor shanty on the other side. We know there are sailor shanties with this fire down below chorus. But in terms of the recording I just played, you see I marked extra time there. They break the meter, they break the rhythm by adding some extra time at the end of those choruses. That's because though the form is the same as what we'd seen earlier, call, response, same length of call, same length of responses as we've seen earlier, the working method for screwing cotton, for operating that jack, is just adapted. It's different than hauling on the halyard, say on the ship. In this method, you're waiting to the end of your line, fire, fire, fire down below, And then when you haul, then you exert that after that. So there's an extra space of time at the very end of each verse in which you do that particular thing. All right. So where I want to take us from here is to see, to support my claim that this, some of the core characteristics of shanties were not limited. Well, I've already shown this, it wasn't limited to the shipboard context and existed in context before it became existing in the shipboard context. And I want to show how it continues to course through American vernacular song with that essential element of the couplet of that very specific length being the kind of the core feature. So, very familiar song, Camptown Races, Stephen Foster's minstrel song. What were the minstrel composers like Stephen Foster doing? They were trying to imitate the characteristics of African American vernacular music. We should not be surprised that this song, the Camptown Ladies, is absolutely in sync with the form of any shanty. Oh, sorry. So there you have, in case you didn't know it, there's the sailor shanty version of Stephen Foster's song with the grand chorus attached. I'm not going to dwell on each of these examples because I kind of want to do a whirlwind to kind of show you another performative form of song embedded in action. Remember, I said it's not limited to shipboard work or even work necessarily, but I think the shanties are about embedding song in action. Work action is one of those actions, but there can be other actions. So the activity called pat and juba in the old days, in which in more recent times we tend to call ham bone, has verses that go like this.
Ham bone, have you heard? Mama gonna buy me a mockingbird. If that mockingbird don't sing, Mama gonna buy me a diamond ring. If that diamond ring don't shine, Mama gonna throw me a fishing line. If that fishing line should break, Mama gonna throw it in the lake. If that water splash on me, Mom's gonna beat my B-U-T-T is what I like to drink when I know I need to think.
Yeah, same form of couplet there. No choral response per se, but there is a response, and it is the percussion, the body percussion that's happening when you're patting juba. That is a percussive response. This is a call and response song, everybody. Solomon Northup, who wrote the autobiography 12 Years a Slave, the free black man, from the North that kidnapped and was enslaved for 12 years in Louisiana, and then lived to tell about it and escape slavery, and then to write about what he saw in the plantations. He gives us this Pat and Juba song. The verses are there. Who's been there since I've been gone? Pretty little gal with a Josie on, and this chorus with a hog eye in it. And folks that know a lot of shanties would certainly be familiar with the song with the hog eye in the chorus, and even similar verse lyrics there. These tropes never see the like since I was born. Here comes a little gal with a Josie on. Those are stock lyrics that I would sing on shipboard to a shanty. And that's another one, like Ranzo, hog eye is another one. The early 20th century writers were always debating, what is the hog eye? It was a type of barge. It was a boat in San Francisco. It was a female anatomy. It was something on a ship. All these sorts of things because they're thinking about ships. But again, I would say, no. If on enslaved people on the plantation were singing this hog eye, I think we need to reevaluate the search for the meaning of that, if in fact it had any meaning at all beyond just sounding good. So similarly, we could continue this. Think about, say, these children's hand games in my neighborhood growing up. With my little sister, we did these games all the time. They've got the call and response, where again the response is percussion, and they've got these verses that are of the same size as the shanty couplets.
Mama, here's the seed. What did baby done to me? He took away my MTV. Now I'm watching Don't Warning. Bonnie got shot by G.I. Joe. Kick that toe 3 in a row.
Yeah, and just to pause for a second in case you're a little lost with what I'm trying to say about the way I'm suggesting you just squint your eyes a little bit on these forms and see how these could be shanties. Just take shanty like a whiskey Johnny. Oh, whiskey is the life of man. Whiskey Johnny, it's always been since the world began. Whiskey for my Johnny. Oh, mama, mama, can't you see? Whiskey Johnny, oh, what this baby done to me. Whiskey for my Johnny. That's what I'm getting at, is that all these songs have that same brick, that same Lego piece that can be interchanged in that particular way. Same with the military cadences, the jodies, right? Why, Denmark doesn't have these in its military. England doesn't have it. America has these. The United States has these jodies in their military from the background of the African American influence.
I got a dog, his name is Jack.
I got a dog, his name is Jack.
If you throw him a stick, he won't bring it back.
If you throw him a stick, he won't bring it back.
Jack has better things to do.
Jack has better things to do.
You see, old Jack is airborne too.
You see, old Jack is airborne too.
Yeah, so the white colored text there, that's the couplet, and the couplet is a movable couplet. So here, and when you do the jody, you don't respond in a chorus that stays the same throughout, but you just repeat back the line of the caller. But you've got that same germ of the couplet there. The Gandy dancers, people who realign track on the railroads, use this couplet form as well. I'm going to play this quick clip. It's going to give you an idea, so I don't have to say what a Gandy dancer is, and then you'll hear how they rearrange that germ, that kind of cell, which is the couplet.
Most of their time was spent straightening sections of track that had been pounded out of alignment by the tremendous and frequent weight of passing trains. Using 5-foot steel lining bars, each weighing over 20 pounds, gangs pulled in unison, inching the track back into line. Coordination and timing of each man's exertion was critical. One member of the gang, the caller, synchronized the group's physical movements with his voice, ensuring safety and pacing while spiritually uplifting the men at their work.
Right, so as you can see how different contexts, depending on the requirements of the work, rearrange the format of this couplet, but it always remains. I'm going to go a little further afield and just suggest that this couplet of this length, of these style of verses, just form part of like the DNA of vernacular American singers. So you see it in the early rock and roll, for example.
Every little swallow, every chickadee, every little bird in the tall oak tree. The wise old loud, the big black crow, flap for their wings, sing and go, bird, go, rockin' Molly.
I could sing Whiskey Johnny. Every little swallow, every chickadee, Whiskey Johnny. Oh, every little bird in the tall oak tree, whiskey for my Johnny. There's my shanty. A decade later, here's an example of the jazz performer Dave Bartholomew, kind of doing an early version of a rap. He's singing over some of his music with similar types of verses. I'll just play a little bit of it.
The monkey speaks his mind. Now, 3 monkeys sat in a coconut tree, discussing things as they are said to be. Said one to the other, now listen you two, there's a certain rumor that can't be true, that man descended from our noble race. The very idea is a big disgrace. No monkey ever deserted his wife, starved her baby, and ruined her life. Yeah.
Yeah. I acknowledge the time right now. we've just reached an hour. I just have 2 more examples to share, and then I'll wrap up. So we're almost set there. So just want to keep following this thread. I had the rock and roll in the 50s, Dave Bartholomew in the 60s. Example from the 70s. Rudy Ray Moore, the raunchy comedian who created the character of Dolomite. Interesting story. Rudy Ray Moore, as a young man in the 70s, is trying to make it big with current music. He's trying to sound hip, do the sort of current thing. But at some point, he runs across this older black man in the neighborhood who's always spinning these verses, spitting these couplets in a way that were part of that man's heritage, but sounded very old-fashioned to Rudy Ray Moore at the time. But he decides to develop this character that's basically in some ways ripping off that old black man, where he's gonna sing perform some of those verses. But very interestingly, once he first performs those verses to a crowd in his community, the community takes to it. And I think maybe there was some cultural memory there. It's like some forgotten taste. This is like my grandma's cooking. Now I'm sort of tasting, oh yeah, I remember this. Isn't this part of our heritage, these types of verses? And the audience took to it. And that's his character Dolomite. And even though he inserts a lot of extraneous and sometimes offensive words in the middle of his verses, if you delete those, you get the shanty couplet.
Way down in the jungle deep, the lion stepped on the signifying monkey's feet. The monkey said, "Motherfucker, can't you see? You're standing on my goddamn feet." The monkey lived in the jungle in an old oak tree, bullshitting the lion every day in the week.
Rudy Ray Moore, he was kind of the one of the roots of rap in the hip hop sense. And I remember my memory of growing up in the neighborhood I was in and started getting hit by the first wave of rap. One of my favorite early songs was this song "Jam on It" by Nucleus. And as a kid I didn't understand the reference, but they make in the second line here this very clever pun. I learned to rock like Dolomite as in the mineral, which is a rock, but then I'm rocking like a rock and roll, rocking out. And then Dolomite, they're referring obviously to the performer, Rudy Ray Moore's character, about how he was the inspiration of that. Rudy Ray Moore was just spinning his verses over that kind of loose, jammy jazz music. What makes rap be, the new genre that it was, is that people were saying those verses over funk music. That's essentially what early hip hop was, taking funk musical style and spinning these types of verses over that. So I'm going to play Nucleus's song as an example of that. And then also a Curtis Blow track, which I really love because this one also has a chorus in it, a choral response that fits the length of a halyard shanty. And we could go out sailing right now and raise the upper topsail with Curtis Blow's verses.
Cause when I was a little baby boy, my mama gave me a brand new toy. 2 turntables with a mic, and I learned to rock like a Dolomite. Time went by on this God creation. I knew someday I would rock the nation, so I made up my mind just what to do, and I joined with the Jam On production crew. If your woman steps out with another man, and she runs off to them to Japan, and the IRS says they want a chat, and you can't explain why you claimed your cat.
All right. So this is abruptly where I want to end my remarks. I'd like to have some discussion, have some Q&A. While we are in the discussion session, I do want to ask people who are on the Zoom, if you'd like to compose a verse. I want you to compose a couplet that we can all sing at the end of the session. We can use that as our Lego brick that will insert into more familiar sailor shanties. So your homework assignment, while you're not doing anything else during this discussion, is to compose a couplet any way you want. Maybe try to make it rhyme. Use this metrical length. It's got kind of like 4 beats per line. Were you ever in Mobile Bay? So 4, and then the second line, loading cotton all the day. Something that can match that form. And you can go ahead at any time during the discussion, post that in the chat. And then when we get to the end of the session, I'll be able to read through the chat. You've given me the verses. I don't have to improvise them because you gave me a whole stock of them. And we can sing some shanties based on that. So I thank you very much for your patience and listening to this hour-long one-sided lecture of mine. And I look forward to having some conversation with you all. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, Dan, if you would unmute, I'm going to give a quick announcement or two here. First off, thanks so much to Gibb. And if unmute and give him a round of applause or click on the icons. Because that was awesome and that was instructive and wow. And there's more to come, as he was saying. Before I hand it back to Dan, just a quick couple of announcements. This event is produced by Maritime Folknet. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to maritime culture, preserving maritime culture, mostly through music and cool old boats. We're located up here in the Pacific Northwest. You can find us at maritimefolknet.org. We've got a number of events coming up, including if you are in the Seattle area, we've got a workshop by Iona Fife coming up tomorrow on songs and traditions in Scots Doric language, which is going to be awesome. Information on our website. There are also lots of opportunities around Seattle and around the country to be singing sea shanties and doing community singing. We have links to a number of the Pacific Northwest sea shanties on our website on the community page. In addition, there's a new community singing weekend that's starting up this November 4th to 6th. It's called Raise the Rafters, and if you head to rtrsong.org, you can learn more about that. Gibb also has a book on sea shanties. It's called Boxing the Compass, a century and a half of discourse about sailor shanties. And it looks something like this. And that's about all I'm going to say. I'm going to send it back over to Dan and Gibb now. Dan, if you would take it away.
Okay. Once again, thank you, Gibb, for the most entertaining and enlightening hour of the roots and methods of shanty singing. I like particularly the ties between the shore and the sea, because almost nobody's born at sea or raised at sea. They start out on shore and they end up going later. But I did, before I open this up to general questioning, I'm going to use my MC's prerogative to ask Gibb a couple of questions. And basically, Gibb, how did you get into this? What did you grow up in a maritime setting? How did you get steered into maritime music?
Well, thanks, Dan. I grew up in Connecticut, so there's the shadow of the Mystic Seaport over Connecticut is part of that. We would have, so that kind of filters out into the community to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. That would give me some exposure. I have some ancestors who were, in the Navy and so on, in the Merchant Marine. So I really don't remember, actually. I just remember that by the time that I got interested in it more, I seemed to already know some things. So that's one part of the story. It's kind of hazy. Another is my lifelong love has been Jamaican music. And at some point in my life, when I was in graduate school and I returned to wanting to think more academically about the shanties and return to that material that I remembered from earlier in my life, I was like, oh, this really just seems quite familiar to me. I see these correspondences between that and some of the Jamaican music I was interested in. And I think that's really been a blessing for me to help me draw some of the connections that I draw in my work in particular. And then I could just add that part of my story is that in around 2008, I was working on finishing my PhD. And the thesis was all about drummers in India and Pakistan. And that was work that, now I've spent a couple decades doing it. And at that time I'd spent, nearly a decade doing it. It's like just hard work. It's just all the information has to be recovered by going to India and Pakistan, speaking the local language, which I do, and just talking to people and observing and just tough stuff. And I had a good friend, Revel Carr, who was a classmate of mine in graduate school. He worked at the Mystic Seaport. He worked at the San Francisco Maritime as well as a ranger, performed shanties there and whatnot. So he was into that. So, he was also an influence of mine at that time. And then I was also feeling inspired, having done all that work in India and Pakistan. I want to put my research skills to something that just felt a little easier. It was in English, and it was like material that I could actually search on databases on the internet and start to get some results. So it was just very exciting for me to renew that research. And then I had started a project at that time to try to question everything I learned earlier in my life by learning every song. There's over 400 that are published in Stan Hugel's Shanties from the Seven Seas, and trying in some way to build a vocabulary for the shanties. And there's more, but that's a good start. Thanks for the question.
Well, thank you very much. Let's at this point, let's open this to the general crew here. And I'm going to gallery there. Doug, Doug Olson is raising his hand, waving his hand. So go ahead.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey, Doug.
I'm aware that in 2 Years Before the Mast, Henry Dana talks about the magical, near magical effect of having the right song for the right task.
Yeah.
And it's clear that there are probably other authors who, either by literary design or just because it was in the logbook, have actually recorded some more information than Dana gives. And one of the things I'm especially curious about is that the particular songs that Dana mentions, I don't recognize any of them. They seem to have fallen out of currency. So are other authors offering other songs as the ideal of what they should be doing? And are any of them still current?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Doug. Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast is very important work in trying to create the timeline for these developments. And so Dana was on the California coast in 1834 to 1836. Those were his 2 years. And I've made the same observation, Doug. Those songs that he mentions, I don't know how well they were known before that, but they seem to rapidly disappear. By the time we get into the mid-1840s, you get much more mention everywhere of shanties as we know them, and it's a different repertoire. And those songs of Dana are not there. There's a few other points in Dana that are really, I think, important to note. Most of the time when he was singing shanties, it was when they were stowing the hides. He had the dried out animal hides and stowing those into the cargo hold. Using
very much like screwing the cotton, just forcing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he makes the comparison too. He mentions that the comparison is like screwing the cotton. I think most of the shantying, before it reached the sailors, the premier site of shantying was with the stevedores, with people that are loading cargo primarily. There's actually surprisingly little mention of songs that we would recognize sung during the voyages while they were actually sailing. Most of it's during while he's stowing the hides. He does mention we sang stuff while we were sailing, but these are things that I, in my kind of very more narrow academic way, just for the purpose of research, I don't call them shanties. I don't have a problem if someone else does, but I think for clarity, some of the things he mentions, some of those songs are vocalizations on shipboard, but they aren't quite the genre of shanties. So I suggest the possibility that we think of shipboard work vocalizations not being limited to the genre of shanties. Other songs could be part of other genres. And there's this point where this particular genre of shanties really overtake. So I think most of those, the simple way I would explain it is a lot of those songs were starting to emerge as part of the practice of singing more songs at work, but they the specific genre of shanties then overtook them within just a few years. Yeah,
that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Dan, are you moderating?
Hey, Dan, this is Wayne. I had my hand up there.
Yeah. Okay, Wayne, please. I'm sorry. I was muted, so it was hard for me to say things.
Hi, Wayne.
Hi there. Thanks. Actually, just two things. But one is a follow up to what you're just saying. I do recall Dana though saying is one song is worth like 6 or 7 sailors.
Yeah.
I think he really is pointing to the song as a coordinating tool on board. Yeah. So, and I think he's talking about songs during the voyage too, but I'd have to look back at the book. One thing is I really appreciate the vocalizations of segments you had about raising the halyard, for example, is probably the best one. We really did see the work done on the downbeat. Some of the other clips, I think there's a problem with the synchronization of the sound and the video. But one question I had though, when I looked on online, there's the Menhaden fishery. There's a group of Menhaden fishers of black folks, and they're demonstrating how the work songs are supposed to have worked. And what bothered me was they would not do the work like lifting the nets, hauling the lines on any of the downbeats on the responses. And I just wonder if that was really the case. Like, help me to raise them. There's perfect example of the shanty coordinating work, but they stop and then they do all the work. They don't sing during that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that true? Was that really the form, or do you think that was not accurate?
I have no reason to doubt that. Is how I would answer that. I have no reason to doubt that was the form. And I think if you recall, I mentioned the cotton screwing work, how that was sung. Fire, fire, fire down below. Then you pause. Then you turn the jack screw after that. So there were just limiting for the moment to different African American work songs. They're all different methods, and there are different genres of African American work songs, which I wouldn't lump. There's the hammering type songs, which are like be my woman and I'll be your man. Be my woman and I'll be your man. The clap is where you're hammering, or when you're striking the axe against the tree. That's the type of song where you exert in that rest that's right there. So all I can say is there are different methods of working, and but I felt the same as you, Wayne. Like I don't know if it's necessarily frustration, but I find it curious and interesting that the work method is different, but they might use the same form.
True. Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else? Let's see. By the way, we would also like to ask that, particularly the folks on YouTube, but also you Zoomers, please subscribe to the Maritime Folknet YouTube channel. That, with enough people, that gets us some kind of goodie. I can't remember what it is, but of course you can visit our website at maritimefolknet.org, and although this is a free workshop, we do encourage you to send us a few shekels when you can. Um, and also to check our site for other events that are coming up. We will be doing a Yule_Tide concert either the first or the second Saturday of December. I think that's our next thing after the workshop tomorrow. Okay, looking for a waving hand or something like that.
Helen.
I believe Helen has her hand up.
Helen!
I do.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. Hi, Gibb. Thanks for a great presentation. That was fabulous.
Thanks.
I'm curious about the elusive historic record you kept referring to. What are the typical places that you find the references for this kind of material, the sort of song references and stuff?
That's a great question, Helen. Doug mentioned the different logs, people writing in their shipboard logs. That maybe probably surprisingly, has not been a good place. Like manuscript logs of voyages are very absent in terms of mentions of shanties. There are published travel logs, like Dana's 2 years before the Mass, that type of material that works good for the shipboard stuff. So a lot of those primary sources from the 19th century are what I look at, like published travel logs, more so than the manuscripts. There are, but once I started to think about broadening the context of where this genre might be sung, I started looking more to accounts of plantation life, of inland life in African American communities, and the observations of various travelers who visited those plantations. And that's where I've seen a lot more stuff. And you'll have those observers say, for example, not Frederick Olmsted. There's two Olmsteds. I forget the first name, but one Olmsted was a journalist from the north of the U.S. Goes down to the south. He's totally fascinated by just the culture of the south of the U.S. at that time. And he's at a funeral in Virginia, outside Richmond, Virginia, and it's a African American community's funeral. And he said the body's being interred, lay down to the grave, and at the head of the grave there's this man who's calling out these verses, and it's a call and response, and it sounds like this. And he says, this is like, for my readers' benefit, this is like the song sailors sing at the windlass. So there'll be certain connections that the authors are making in that way. But that's where there is a lot of material. So I think my takeaway is like just expanding the lens beyond what might be thought as typical maritime material. I think that was the handicap of early 20th century writers who inherited the idea that the songs were essentially maritime, so they would only think to look in maritime things. But I tell you, it's a real hard thing to go to archives, because you go to, say, even the Library of Congress, and they're like, what are you interested in? Well, I'm interested in shanties. Oh, well, those are sailor songs. So here's our section of our catalog on sailor songs. And you're like, yeah, well, I know I'm going to look through that, and I'm going to not find a lot, or I'm going to find the same old stuff. And so you say, oh, well, but I'm also interested in these African American contexts that weren't maritime. And they go, okay, here's our African American music section. And that's also filtered in a way to like this whole legacy of what scholars and archives have felt is, they've deemed as should be included in the African American song section, where they might actually exclude the shanties from that. So the topic is kind of in between the categories we have now, which makes things a little difficult.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Helen.
Hey, there's a question in YouTube from Rick Pauley. He was asking before during your presentation. He says, were the cotton screw crews integrated or checkerboard?
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. That's a good question. As far as I know, they were not. They were not integrated. You'd had like the each crew itself, which consisted of 5 members, would be of a single race, as far as I know. But they would be working in proximity. So that's, I guess, that's a form of integration working in proximity. But now the foreman would find out, was sort of the subcontractor who would get together the rest of the gang there. And then there's, in the later 19th century, which is kind of beyond my period of interest, but cotton screwing, or the screwmen, or the cotton jammers, they were called by various names. That was the site of some of the very first labor organizing, and because there were racial conflicts at that time on the wharfs with unions that were racially segregated for a time, and the white union angry about the black union, and so on and so forth. In the 1890s, there were riots of sorts on the levee in New Orleans that were caused by this racial tension, until finally the unions agreed to cooperate, as workers, and sort of end that racial conflict. But short answer I already gave. As far as I know, within a crew, you wouldn't necessarily have a mixture, but you'd have the different race crews working in proximity. Thanks.
I believe Wayne's got his hand up again.
Oh.
Yeah, Dan. I've been collecting shanty books for a while now, but I think there was this period of time, as you say, the shantying kind of ended in the 1920s, but I think some of the skippers and workers started putting anthologies together. So like you do get songs or books 1924, a couple of them. Colt Chords first came out about 21. Yep. So, and then they get into more refined later on to Shea and Dorflinger. So these books are around, and the nice thing is they capture the melodies, and some of them actually have the music written out, which is nice. But some of these get into compendiums, and then Hugel writes his book with some experience, a lot of experience, and gives it a better context, I think. But there's a couple other books like Shanting on American Whalers and others like that are pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's a topic I take up. Thanks, Wayne. That's a topic I take up in my book, Boxing the Compass, is essentially kind of a literature review of the various populations since around the time of Dana's 2 years before the Mask up through the 20th century. And where did all those authors that you mentioned, what were their sources? How good or bad a job did they do? And sort of how did one idea from one writer transfer over to the next, and how did they sort of build their ideas from that? Yeah, and I have opinions and all very specific opinions on all of them. Like Captain Wall, I'll give you a good example. Captain Wall, whose book is first published in 1910, then republished in 1911, 1913, 1920. Finally, in 1920, he adds certain African American songs that he said, I didn't want to include those earlier, but there's such a demand that I have to add these now. So you wonder why he didn't include them earlier. Yeah. What if there was a bias there? But
they're named profanely too.
Say again.
The chapter is named profane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good observation. My opinion on his book is I think his melodies are very excellent. He does a very, very good job. If I cross compare those to other sources, of capturing the melodies very well. The things he says about the songs, which is supposed to be like their history or their meaning, I think is very, very poor and just wild speculation, and has created harmfully a lot of narratives that are untrue and not useful now. So it's like this book that's very excellent in one sense and not in the other. Now, Bullen, the work by Bullen of 1914, Songs of Sea Labor, is one of my favorite shanty collections, because I think Bullen was a shanty man himself who started in the 1860s, and he took his first trip down to Guyana, and he first learned his first shanties off of some black stevedores who were saying, off a black stevedore kid, and his mom said, "Don't teach that white man how to sing these songs." But he was a working shanty man for a long time, and I think what he says is quite accurate in his book. But then his transcriptions are totally screwed up. They wander into different keys and all these sorts of things, and you can't really get the melody from what he wrote.
Thank you very much.
Uh, Doug, and then there was somebody else had a hand up. Oh, Wendy. Okay, Doug, then Wendy.
Yeah. The other question I wanted to, or point I wanted to make, is that there's a whole body of song that are not work songs, that are not shanties. Things like The Fire Ship, which are folksile songs and are highly entertaining. And everybody says, oh, that's about a sailor. It must be a shanty. But of course, it's not. And is there anything to say about how those folksile songs, which were derived in many ways from current stage songs, did they influence shanties or vice versa, as far as you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, good question, Doug. I think I wouldn't say yes in a broad sense, but the shanty man took material from anywhere potentially, so that's there. I have a somewhat controversial opinion, maybe, that I think our category of folksile songs is I mean, I suppose you could say this about anything, but it's a bit of a construct that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality so much. I think our concept of that may be in danger of being more narrow than it should be.
Well, maybe we should just call them folk songs.
Yeah, that is to say, yeah, it's just like, this is just sailors on ship now and then sing any song they want to sing.
Exactly.
It's popular. And there's a lot of evidence to support that how minstrel songs were performed a lot, enjoyed, and that was just the contemporaneous popular material. It's not like singling out minstrel song, like they're just into that. I mean, that was just the concurrent material that was going with it. So people are trying to perform the latest sort of music. So then there is a repertoire of songs that we could really feel are like the sailors' songs, but I think some publications have sifted and filtered and presented that body as if, on shipboard you have these two categories, the shanties and then these folksile songs, which the folksile songs were really like pure sailors songs, where I think it was really just the shanty genre was operative for when you're working on the ships, and then sailors sang any old other song they felt like.
Yeah.
And yeah, some of them were really about sailors a lot, intensively, and they're enjoyable to remember in that way, but there isn't that term. I'm sorry, I don't have the reference with me, but the term either folksile song or forbidder does not appear frequently at all in the 19th century record.
No, but there were, I believe I've seen something called a sailor's song bag, in which somebody had written down the words of a lot of the songs they enjoyed, and I guess the guy had been a sailor, so they certainly weren't sea songs, and I don't think they were shanties at all, but they were things like Adieu, Sweet Lovely Nancy, and he'd write the words down.
Absolutely, and we get more mentions of these actually in those logs, in those manuscripts.
Yeah.
And there's one, I'm trying to remember the author, I think it was Dana. It is Dana, Charles Henry Dana, that notes how before his generation, the stage songs, the English stage songs of Dibdin in particular, and lots of other stage songs, were those most popular songs. These stage writers at the Royal Theatre in London were creating songs tailored to their sailors, and so he's got this account where they meet with another ship, and they have an enjoying evening together, and he describes like about 5 different songs that they all go back to, the earliest go back to like the early 18th century, and then the latest go up to like around, say not 19, but like 1810, something like that. They're all composed stage songs, and he said these songs are still kind of popular amongst them, but nowadays is what time? Mid 1830s. We're starting to change. Mid 1830s is when American popular music takes over with its smash hit new music, which is the minstrel song genre.
Right. This is digression, but when I was like 8 years old, I was in a bus in Israel with a bunch of Americans. It was a package tour with my parents. And it was a long night. You had to drive from here to there, having seen everything. Somebody started singing, and this was an international group. There were Americans, but all kinds of Europeans. Somebody started a song, and the entire bus sang along. They all knew the songs. That's a digression. But thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Wendy, I think you were next. You're muted. Wendy, you are still muted.
Okay, got it?
You're on.
Okay. There's quite a bit of cross-fertilization from different places all over the world. And though we're concentrating on American stuff here, how would we figure out where different stuff came from and how it was worked into what became American shanties? How would we go about that?
Yeah, good question, Wendy. So I've acknowledged that I'm using this this method of thinking of shanties as a genre. So that I think genres are typically rooted in they're primarily rooted in some geographic cultural space. Let's say rock and roll is a genre, and I think if we looked at rock and roll music and we looked at most of the rock and roll songs, we could find similarities across them, such that, without even formally analyzing, such that you hear a rock and roll song and someone says, "What genre is that?" And you're like, "I know, it's rock and roll." How do you know? Because what it sounds like, this sort of thing, right? Now, a rock and roll band might play a party, and at that party they might digress from most of their material and play like "Fly Me to the Moon," a jazz tune standard. Or they might, it's a birthday party, so they sing "Happy Birthday" or something, and that jazz tune or that "Happy Birthday," comes from somewhere else. But I think in terms of like the historical reconstruction and analysis I'm trying to do, it's more helpful to look at what the standard thing is. And I think there are these standard characteristics that make up the shanty genre, such that it's not really troubling or problematic. If I don't know, if someone a Swedish singer had sang a song in Swedish, like what would happen? They put in some words, and then I don't think that, I think that's a more superficial addition, I guess, is what I'm saying.
For example, the the huge Polish shanty scene, I suppose you would call it, and why it's important there, and how did the Poles get involved, and the content of some of the verses. A lot of it's from all different places all over the world, France, Ireland, a lot of Irish stuff. I'm curious to figuring out how that stuff all got worked together.
So that's a more recent thing, right? That's a late 20th century thing to translate English shanties into Polish language and to sing them.
I don't know. I'd have to ask Mark.
Yeah, and there were some leaders, in the communities, certain key figures in Poland, for example, who sort of took the charge to do that. Listened to performances of Stan Hugel, met the man, said we want to translate these songs into Polish, and kind of started a scene there. So yeah, it's a good question. There's like all little sort of micro histories of different scenes of things that have happened in the 20th century.
Now, I'm talking about, way before, going back, as you said, to the 18th century, and how the little bits and pieces all got wound together and ended up as mixed up with everything else and what we've got.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, that far back, there's some really basic things we want to know are hard to recover. So the fine details like that are even harder to recover. But so, like, as I said, I tend to focus on the broad strokes more. I think even if I incorporate some reference to a different country in my song. More or less, the song that I sing is coming out of my culture. So, it's not the sort of mainstream of
Yeah.
my expression.
My interest is really in looking at some of the words and how they may point to where they came from. Can't give an example here, but if I had a bunch of shanties in front of me, I could say, that looks like it's maybe come through a French influence. That sounds Irish. This sounds Polish. This whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, it would be great if we had examples. But these are words in English, or these are words in non-English languages?
In English, but derived from some other, someplace else.
Yeah, well, it'd be great if we have some examples. We could, if you feel like, if you remember some and you want to ask me about those.
My memory is shot. I have to look things up.
You could send them to me later, and maybe I have some thoughts on them.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's always possible too that sometimes, Wendy, the versions we're working from, or we're seeing these things, might be latter day creations of some publisher. So there might not be evidence actual in the historical record that was a historical song, but that might be more of a creation of a later day writer. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Wendy.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hey, Gibb.
Yes.
We've got a few examples of couplets that people have put into the chat. So I don't know if you want to try and get into that here. Let me.
I would love to get into that.
I see one more hand up with a question.
Yeah, Charles has a hand up. We could grab this question and then.
Oh, please. Yeah. Sorry, Charles.
Thank you so much. I can be brief.
Hey, Charles, what's up?
Not too much.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm just, I guess I'm wondering, a lot of like African-American camp meeting spiritual songs from the 19th century follow a very similar call and response format with maybe a improvised or semi-improvised couplet, short chorus, long chorus. Do you think there's reason to kind of loop that into the same genre? Is that casting too wide a net? Is there, more crossover there maybe than we thought about?
Charles, you know this stuff well, so I think we should give you the job of answering that.
Not me.
I don't know that material well enough to give you a proper answer. This game of interpretation, is kind of like, matching fingerprints to things. You find a fingerprint, and this one has these whorls, and this one has another whorls, and if you see certain matches of correspondence, they sort of match up, and every music matches some other music in the world at some point, and it's sort of a matter of interpretation of like how much does it match that you kind of group them.
No, of course,
right?
Of course.
So if I were to know that better, I might have an opinion that I think enough of them, enough of it sort of matches. But for me, I think the physical embedding in some kind of physical activity is one of the things that I follow. Now, you notice in my presentation that I don't require that necessarily, as like when I started to go into more recent times and rap and stuff like that. Although that is dance. And that is one of the physical activities, but that might be one thing that I would look for, not just the form, but I would look for some other or two other characteristics that are similar before I started to say that. But yeah, but I think the length of that couplet too is important. So you might be able to tell us whether it's not just call and response, but whether it's call and response of that specific. The couplets have that very specific length as well.
Mary Peters, were you raising your hand, or were you just pushing a button on something?
No, really. Sorry. Came in late. Hi, Dan. Bye.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I'm looking for raised hands. I guess what we have a bunch of 5 or 6 or 7 couplets.
We do.
Oh, somebody. I think that's probably David who just somebody organized our couplets here.
Oh, excellent.
Mine's not there yet.
And feel free to add more as we go, because this isn't even this is excellent, but it's not even enough to get up 1 yard. We might need a few more.
Yeah, I have one in there somewhere.
Okay. Would somebody like to suggest the shanty that we use as the framework?
Were you ever in Puget Sound? Did they haul you out, or were you drowned?
Yeah, I was thinking donkey riding.
That's a good one. Winahan does a nice job on that.
So we're going to do it as the basic form, no grand chorus on this. Okay, do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay, muting.
And I've got various tunes rolling around in my head, but I'll just say like, were you ever in Quebec? Donkey riding, screw a load and timber on the deck, riding on a donkey. And then we'll repeat that sort of thing. That's the tune we'll use, okay? So, here we go. Feel free to sing along. These are your verses, not mine. Oh! I'm going to go up a little bit. Oh, were you ever in Puget Sound? Donkey riding, did they haul you out or were you drowned? Riding on a donkey. Oh, at my desk and on the Zoom. Donkey riding, making words to fit Gibb's tune, riding on a donkey. Do you sing on Zoom each day? Donkey riding, I ran online and lost my way, riding on a donkey. A Zoom fatigue is a real big thing, donkey riding, but we gotta know about the songs we sing, riding on a donkey. Hey, singing on Zoom is hard to do. Donkey riding, just for one but not for two, riding on a donkey. And did you ever read Stan's notation? Donkey riding, it's the source of some frustration. Riding on a donkey. And when you were on a Marston quad, donkey riding, did you lie upon the sod, riding on a donkey? Yes. Excellent verses, everybody. I want to make a comment.
Gibb for teaching us donkey riding, about the songs where we can cuss. Riding on a donkey.
Yeah, we missed that one, Dan. Thank you. And I love to do this with the students and just say, you start to. Well, I'll make two quick comments. Digress for a second. I played that example from Curtis Blow, the early rapper from the early 80s. You go back, you listen to Curtis Blow's lyrics, and they sound like very primitive, in some way, in terms of rap. They sound a lot more like these lyrics that we're sort of doing. Rap has, developed over the decades now since then to be more composed and a little more flashy and sophisticated in the lyrics. But I like to say, just all these words like you guys are coming up with, tune and sound, and whenever you don't have a rhyme, you don't know what rhymes with Seattle, so you go, were you ever in Seattle town? Cruising the streets all up and down. Then you can rhyme, because you're not gonna be able to rhyme anything with Seattle. So you got all these little tricks with bay and day and up and down and that sort of thing. Handy My Boys is a really good song to practice that on. Handy my boy, so handy. Handy my boy, so handy. Handy here and handy there. Handy my boy, so handy. Handy all around the square. Handy left and handy right. Handy day and handy night. Handy up and handy down. Handy round and round and round. These kind of really simple things work well for that. But I like to say that as a shanty man, when I step into that position, I really love the halyard shanties because they don't have the grand chorus and they let me have the chance to keep saying my part. Whereas I think the chorus singers like the longer songs with the grand choruses because that gives them the chance to come in full-throated and sing their full chorus for a long time. So it's a bit of like a struggle between the aesthetic preferences of the chorus and the lead singer.
I took your chat.
Oh, you did the challenge. Were you ever in Seattle? Donkey riding, where Decatur won the battle, riding on a donkey.
That was part of the Battle of Seattle in 18 something or other.
Excellent.
And a U.S. Navy ship was in the harbor and used their cannon to help drive the folks who should have owned the country away.
So I'll just want to throw in a last word to say that sometimes the shanty revival, maritime revival, singing groups talk a bit about the younger generation, how to get them interested, involved, all these sorts of things. And I think there are several pathways to that. One is to engage them in this way in terms of the lyrics, to say, you don't sing the old lyrics. There's no script. You're making it up. It's just like the rap and the hip hop that you listen to. And it's this is the place where you voice what you want to say, And that also gets around the issue of like, that the younger generation struggles with, as well as like old songs may have something said in them that we no longer approve of. Fine, don't say them. You don't need to say them. There's like it's not even something you have to really deal with. I mean, the historian deals with that, but in terms of a modern day performer, you can say anything you want to say. So you don't have to say those old songs. And by saying anything you want to say, ironically, you are being totally authentic and historical by doing that. So that's a really, I think, great way to engage those younger audiences and say, this is not old music. This can be as current as you want it to be. Wayne.
Just a passing comment. You're speaking of the younger generation. You mentioned the Waterman and TikTok fad, but about 10 years ago, we started seeing a lot of younger folks show up at our shanty sings and couldn't figure it out. And they would be singing shanties really well, but all kind of a certain version. And it was the Assassin's Creed video game that brought them in. And that was amazing. It was amazing. And it was a great source of recruitment, much more long lasting than the TikTok phase. And we've benefited from that greatly.
And Wayne, there's a lot of little histories to uncover. We'll get them someday orally. There's some, I don't quite know the history myself yet, but I when the Assassin's Creed video game came out, I had I was actually leading a maritime ensemble, like a class you could register for with my students at Pomona College. And partway through the class, this comes out. The game comes out. This is 2013. And I see the game, and I say, shoot, it looks like some of what they're doing, I believe, comes from some YouTube videos which I made. And sure enough, I found it later on some message board, the game creator saying, well, when we were working up the repertoire for this game, we used various sources, and we went on YouTube and we used this channel, and one of them is sort of my channel. And it's kind of funny because, I obviously sang the song in a very specific way that I had heard no one sing it before, because at that time I was doing my renditions of the purely notated part of Stan Hugel's book, but it's my rendition of that, which oftentimes was different than how people had performed before. And then in the Assassin's Creed, they're doing it similar to that. I'm like, hey, yeah. I figure they heard it and thought, well, this must be the traditional way. This just happens to be a YouTube example of the way everyone had always sung it, but it wasn't. So someday I'll figure out the
and then it got more produced by some of the members of Laneth in Montreal, and that was a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Should we wrap up?
Sorry, my mouse was being recalcitrant. Yeah, I guess I'm just looking to see if anybody else is waving a hand or sticking a hand up in the air or doing any of those things. Gibb, thank you very much for doing this with us. This has surpassed my expectations, which were pretty high already. Yeah. Wonderful to see all of you folks, even if it's just your names in some cases. Some of you are friends I've sung with over the years. Some of you I've never run into before. But it's just really inspiring to go over this with all of you. And once again, would like to remind you, if you are local, tomorrow from, I believe, 6 till 8. Can we pin in the address for the workshop, David?
Yep, if you head to maritimefolknet.org, you can find information on the Iona Fife workshop, and it will also be, that link will also be in the YouTube and the Zoom chat.
Okay, and once you're on the Maritime Folknet website, feel free to donate. Also, feel free to buy some of our CDs, which are almost all maritime related, with a few exceptions. What else was I supposed to say? That's right. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, buy Gibb's book, and please enjoy singing shanties.
Will this recording be put up on YouTube?
Yes, this recording will be on the Maritime Folknet YouTube channel.
And you can access that through our website, right? Okay.
Yep, or going to YouTube and just searching for Maritime Folknet. It will be there.
Cool.
Okay, great. Thank you. It was very informative and interesting.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, Storm.
Appreciate all the comments in the chat as well. Thanks for your time.
All right. Okay. Well, and time to go. When you're ready to push the button, David, you can do so. I don't know what else to say. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.